When people imagine prehistoric Britain, they usually think of rugged men with spears chasing mammoths across icy plains. But that's only half the story, if even that. The other half has been buried, sometimes quite literally, under layers of earth, time, and assumptions. Women in prehistoric Britain didn't just sit around waiting for men to bring home dinner. Evidence suggests they may have been farmers, healers, spiritual leaders, artisans, and in some cases figures of serious social power. Yet for centuries their contributions have been sidelined or overlooked entirely. This video dives into a world before written history, where archaeology and a little detective work help us reimagine the lives of women long forgotten, from goddess figurines to elite burials. What do we actually know about the women who lived, worked, and possibly ruled in prehistoric Britain? Let's unearth the truth, one burial site at a time. Prehistoric Britain spans a mind-boggling stretch of time, roughly 900,000 years, depending on where you start counting. But for this investigation, we'll focus on the periods from around 40,000 BCE to the Roman invasion in 43 CE. That's the Upper Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic, Bronze Age and Iron Age before writing arrived and history officially began. This was an era without written records. Everything we know about prehistoric people, men and women alike, comes from archaeology: burial sites, tools, bones, pottery, dwellings, and rare symbolic objects. That means we're piecing together lives from fragmentary evidence, and interpretations can shift as new discoveries are made. So, what exactly do we mean by women's roles in this context? It's not about comparing them to modern expectations, it's about understanding how prehistoric societies were structured, how labor was divided, and how status and identity were expressed, especially in death. In the absence of texts, graves become our best source of biography. Interestingly, some burials in Britain, particularly from the Neolithic and Bronze Age, show women interred with items that suggest importance: jewelry, elaborate clothing, and even weapons. In the Iron Age, some women were buried in chariots or with feasting gear, signs of high status, often associated with male warriors. But these aren't just anomalies. When placed in context, they suggest a much more complex picture of gender roles in early Britain than the old hunter-man, gatherer-woman model allows. Before we dive into the timeline, one thing is clear. Prehistoric women weren't just background figures in a world built by men. They were shaping that world in ways we're only beginning to understand. Paleolithic, before 10,000 BCE. The original survivors. During the last ice age, small bands of hunter-gatherers roamed what is now Britain. Life was harsh, mobility was essential, and survival was the only real job description. There's limited evidence for this period, but studies of hunter-gatherer societies worldwide suggest that labor was often shared more equally than we tend to assume. While men likely hunted large game, women gathered plant foods, trapped small animals, processed food, and cared for children, all of which were critical to group survival. In fact, some anthropologists argue that women's gathering provided the majority of the group's daily calories. There are even Paleolithic figurines like the so-called Venus statues found across Europe, which some interpret as fertility symbols or representations of powerful female figures, though their exact meaning is still hotly debated. Mesolithic, 10,000–4,000 BCE, adaptation and autonomy. As the climate warmed and forests returned, Britain's hunter-gatherers adapted to new landscapes. Fishing, foraging, and small-scale hunting dominated. Settlements were still mobile, but sites like Carr in North Yorkshire give us a rare glimpse into this era. At Carr, both male and female remains have been found with similar grave goods, suggesting relatively balanced social roles. A woman's burial here included red ochre, deer antlers and beads, objects associated with ritual or symbolic meaning. Though it's impossible to know her exact status, her burial points to women participating in important cultural practices, not just domestic chores. Neolithic, 4,000–2,500 BCE, farmers, builders, and the rise of the ancestors. The Neolithic marks a revolution. Farming arrived from continental Europe, and with it came permanent settlements, megalithic monuments, and new forms of social organization. Communities built long barrows and chambered tombs, giant burial structures used over generations. And the remains inside them tell a surprising story. At sites like Windmill Hill and West Kennet Long Barrow, men and women were buried together, often with similar grave goods. This suggests a society where gender may not have determined status or burial rights. In fact, some archaeologists argue that lineage, age, or family role mattered more than gender. There's also evidence of female figurines and symbolic art, leading some to propose that Neolithic Britain had elements of goddess worship or matrilineal traditions. Though controversial, the presence of these figures hints at a spiritual or cultural emphasis on femininity, fertility, and the earth itself. Bronze Age, 2500–800 BCE, wealth, hierarchy, and elite women. The Bronze Age brought metallurgy, trade, and inequality. Grave goods become more elaborate, but also more selective, suggesting growing social stratification. And interestingly, some of the richest graves belong to women. Take the Amesbury Archer near Stonehenge, often highlighted for his wealth and foreign origins. But not far away, archaeologists found the burial of the Boscombe bowmen and several high-status women buried with gold ornaments, amber beads, and intricate dress fasteners. One woman from Wiltshire was buried with a necklace made of jet and amber, materials sourced from distant regions, signs of elite connections and wealth. These burials suggest that some women had access to power, prestige, and long-distance trade networks. They weren't just wives or mothers of powerful men, they may have been powerful themselves. Iron Age, 800 BCE, 43 CE. Tribal queens and warrior women. As Iron Age tribal societies formed, Britain saw the rise of hill forts, warrior elites, and regional identities. Gender roles likely became more distinct, but that didn't mean women disappeared from power. The famous Wetwang woman, buried in East Yorkshire, was interred in a chariot, a symbol usually associated with male warriors. Her grave included bronze bangles, a mirror, and a decorated brooch. She was clearly important, but was she a warrior, a leader, or a religious figure? We don't know, but the chariot alone speaks volumes. Other burials, like those from the Arras culture in Yorkshire, suggest that elite women may have held spiritual or tribal authority. Some were buried with feasting gear, talks, and other symbols of leadership. Later, during the Roman period, historical texts mention powerful British women like Boudica. While she lived after prehistory, her story hints that female leadership wasn't entirely foreign to the British Isles. Across every age, the evidence is fragmentary, the story's partial, but one pattern is clear. Women in prehistoric Britain were not passive background figures. They gathered, built, traded, healed, raised generations, honored the dead, and just maybe ruled. As the Roman legions set foot on British soil in 43 CE, they didn't just bring roads, aqueducts, and strange new gods. They also brought a fundamentally different worldview, one with strict hierarchies, patriarchal law, and a clear divide between public and private life. Compared to the fluid gender dynamics of earlier Britain, this was a seismic cultural shift. Roman records rarely mentioned prehistoric customs, but what they did notice were powerful local women, sometimes with surprise, sometimes with scorn. Figures like Cartimandua and famously Boudica were tribal leaders who led armies and negotiated with emperors. To Roman eyes, this was unusual, but to the native Britons, it might have been tradition. Over time, as Roman institutions took hold and Christianity arrived, many pre-existing roles and symbols of female status faded or were absorbed. Goddess figures were replaced by male saints. Female burials became less elaborate. A cultural memory of powerful women may have survived in legend, but not in law. The prehistoric past was slowly overwritten by Roman order, and with it the complex roles of Britain's ancient women began to disappear from sight, until we started digging them up again. The further back we go in history, the harder it becomes to see clearly. But when we piece together the bones, the artifacts, and the burial sites, a picture starts to form, one that challenges the old stereotypes. Prehistoric Britain wasn't just a man's world. Women played essential, dynamic, and sometimes dominant roles in the spiritual, social, and economic life of their communities. Whether as healers, leaders, farmers, or ancestors remembered in stone, their influence was woven into the fabric of early British life. We may never recover their full stories, but we can stop writing them out of history. If you found this perspective eye-opening, help us dig deeper into the past. Like the video, subscribe to Infinitia Verity, and tell us in the comments which prehistoric woman deserves a documentary of her own, because history doesn't just need kings and battles, it needs the whole story.